Monday. Welcome to another episode of Brain Scratch, Case Cracked. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today. Of course, this is the show where we look into a mystery and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Before we start today's case, I just want to let you know there's some construction going on outside. I'm going to do my best to try to clean up that sound for you guys when I'm editing, but if you hear something like a bulldozer or some beeping, I'm doing my best. Just stick with me. We'll get through this. This is a case that I like to call a sucker for DNA. It's December 16th, 1995 in Utah, and Wasatch County Sheriff's Deputy Todd Bonner has been called out early in the morning. A local farmer claimed to have found someone on the banks of the Provo River. Bonner had no idea that he was about to become entangled in a case that would stretch 18 years before its conclusion. Lying face down on the rocks that surround the beach was the broken, naked body of a young woman. The victim and the granite stones she laid on were covered in blood. Her head so mutilated that a visual ID would be impossible. As Deputy Bonner took in the scene, it became apparent that the murderer had used those very same rocks to kill the woman. While working the crime scene along the beach, Bonner noticed that the victim's clothes were nowhere to be found. But what bothered him most was the amount of rage this person had leveled against their victim. The rocks used by the killer were large. Some had to be lifted with two hands. It would have taken a tremendous amount of strength to cause the damage he saw before him. With her face beyond recognition and her clothes and identification gone, the killer hadn't only stolen her life, they had also stolen her identity. 2 days after the discovery, the sheriff's office got a call about a missing person. A man who was kept unidentified in the media called to report that his girlfriend was missing. He stated that the two had moved to the Salt Lake area, just about 45 miles away, only a few months prior. On December 15th, his girlfriend, 17-year-old Crystal Beslanowicz, left their North Temple motel room to grab a bite to eat at a nearby convenience store. As the man was questioned, it became apparent that he wasn't necessarily only her boyfriend. He was actually also her pimp. Crystal Beslanowicz had lived most of her short, troubled life in Spokane, Washington. From the age of 12, she had worked as a prostitute to supply her crack cocaine habit, even becoming pregnant and having that child taken from her by the state. Her mother and stepfather tried their best to support her and help her when they could, but Crystal always willingly returned to her old ways. Using photos and visual identification, it was confirmed that Deputy Bonner did indeed have Crystal's body. Tuesday, December 19th, officers announced her identification and the results of the autopsy. Some of the surrounding rocks had indeed been used as the murder weapon. Crystal's skull had been struck 8 to 9 times. There were no signs of sexual assault. Investigators continued to interview her pimp/boyfriend and ultimately ruled him out as a suspect. If he didn't have anything to do with the murder, was it a drug deal gone wrong, or were they possibly even dealing with a serial killer? Another prostitute in the area had been found murdered recently, but the circumstances of her death didn't match Crystal's. However, the notion of a serial killer being in the area put even more pressure on Bonner to solve the case. Over the next 2 years, he became lead investigator of Crystal's murder. He and his team traveled the state looking for answers, but with practically nothing to go on, he soon exhausted every avenue and lead. Bonner had 3 daughters of his own. Crystal's case had become personal, and he wanted it solved. As much as he desired that, Crystal's case went cold. Bonner moved on in his career, but never forgot about the teenager. As often as possible, he continued to look over her files, trying to find something, anything, that they had missed. He even sought the insight of seasoned cold case detectives, but nothing would turn up until the case was reopened in 2006. New technology at the state crime lab now made it possible to examine DNA evidence from sources that couldn't be investigated before. DNA taken from under the victim's fingernails, as well as DNA taken from the rocks used to kill her, were once again looked at. Unfortunately, they provided only partial DNA sequences, but it was more than they had before. The reinvigorated case would see 2 full-time detectives assigned to it. In 2009, Bonner was elected Wasatch County Sheriff, which enabled him to keep an even closer eye on the developing case. Quote, "It's always in the back of your mind. All the investigators that I still associate with that were a part of this, it's always in the back of their minds," Bonner said. As DNA evidence collection techniques advanced, they continued to come back to those partial samples. If this was a repeat offender, and if they could get a full DNA profile, they would find their murderer. In 2013, a new piece of technology called the M-Vac was developed. This handheld, sterile, wet vacuum can be sprayed on any surface while simultaneously vacuuming that liquid off again. This creates a mini hurricane that loosens the DNA material from the evidence surface, and it's collected for further testing. This process has proven to regain much more genetic material than conventional collection, even from porous surfaces like those granite rocks. Using 2 of the rocks that had never been tested, Sorensen Forensics was able to pick up touch DNA. This produced a major profile for Sheriff Bonner to finally search. In January of 2013, the Combined DNA Index System database, or CODIS, returned a match to a man named Joseph Michael Simpson. Bonner had no idea where the man was, but he learned that Simpson had run afoul of Utah law enforcement before. Joseph Simpson was arrested and convicted for murder in August of 1987, just a half hour away in Clearfield, Utah. Simpson first arrived at the Utah State Prison in November of 1987 and would serve time there until he was paroled in April 1995, only a matter of months before Crystal's death. In June of 1997, he received a travel permit while on parole and went to Nevada, where he was arrested on a drug-related charge. After spending a short time in jail in Nevada, Simpson was extradited back to Utah, where he served more time until he was paroled yet again in September of that year. After completing his parole in 2003, Simpson moved to Sarasota County, Florida, where he had lived ever since. So Bonner had a name, but didn't know any more about the circumstances of Crystal's death. The next step was to get a new, fresh DNA sample from Simpson for the lab to test. In August, with the help of law enforcement in Sarasota County, the now retired Bonner and another Utah detective tracked down Simpson and set up surveillance. On the 25th, they followed him to a tobacco store where he smoked a cigarette and tossed it aside as he left. That cigarette butt was exactly what Bonner needed. The lab determined it was a match. On Tuesday, September 17th, after 18 years, Bonner was finally able to put handcuffs on Simpson at his home, charging him with the murder of Crystal Lynn Beslanowicz. Quote, "It's a case that's haunted me for almost my whole career. It's closure for me as well. I'm very thrilled of the outcome, but it has taken a lot of time and it has taken a lot of work." At no time has Simpson given a reason for Crystal's murder, but Bonner theorized it had something to do with either drugs, prostitution, possibly both. Simpson was out on parole at the time of the murder and would not have wanted to come into contact with law enforcement. So, after he killed Crystal, he discarded her clothes to throw off authorities and disposed of any incriminating evidence. The court found Simpson guilty of aggravated murder. Before sentencing, the 49-year-old asked them to give him hope that he might one day see the outside of his prison. "I know it's going to be 20, maybe 30 years down the road," he said, "but it's still hope that I can have another chance." In less than 1 hour, the court came to a decision and ordered that Simpson serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole. After a lifetime of work, Bonner was finally able to make the phone call that he had been waiting 18 years to make. He reported that Crystal's mother and her husband were very relieved, very emotional, and very happy. Nothing would ever replace the daughter they had lost, but they now had justice and her soul could be at rest. Case cracked. Wow, this case just hits me in a few different ways. One of them is we kind of see this pattern in some cases where we have an offender, they get paroled, they reoffend. The jail sentences, I don't know why he's spending what seems like so little time in jail. I mean, he was already in jail for murder, and I think in that one it looked like he was only in jail for about 7 years or so. I don't know what's going on with the system when we have things like this, and it almost makes me wonder, like, with technology that we have right now, if someone is paroled, can't we have some kind of monitoring system on them or something? I mean, I know they're not under house arrest, I understand that, but there's got to be some in between there where we can just kind of keep an eye on them. That's more than, a check-in with your parole officer once a month or something like that. I want to hear you guys' thoughts about that in the comments below. Let me know what you think. If there's some type of right way to do monitoring for parolees like that, because it strikes me, we look into a lot of cases where this kind of thing seems to happen again and again. There's also another aspect of this case that's really heartbreaking, and that's that we still don't really have an explanation. We still really don't understand what the motive is. I mean, I think Bonner's probably right. We're talking about drugs or we're talking about prostitution, but effectively, we don't have a comment from Simpson about what this was actually about. And admittedly, would that help all that much? Maybe for the general public, no, but for the family, I think so. I think it might help their process. I'm sure they're wondering why her, why did he do it? The M-Vac is a real interesting twist in this whole DNA angle. And when I was at CrimeCon, I can't remember if it was last year or 2 years ago, a rep for the company actually came and spoke to me, and they spoke to me, I think it was about this case. I didn't put it together at the time, but they were telling me that it was being used on surfaces, and they were telling me about a particular case that involved a rock. So I think there's a good chance it might be this same case, though admittedly it's being used in all kinds of different places and different ways. The M-Vac has won several invention awards, and it's helped a number of investigators solve crimes. It continues to build momentum in forensic DNA collection in the US and also around the world. All kinds of other countries are using this. And it's got kind of an interesting story in terms of how it started. It didn't start as a DNA tool. There was a guy that was basically looking into equipment that is used for food production, and how can you test that equipment to see if there's pathogens on the equipment. And then the thought of just how cleaning that equipment kind of came to him. There's some of you might have used wet vacs in your house. It's a vacuum cleaner that's spraying on one side and it's sucking on the other. It's all in the same head, so it's happening at the same time. And they just had this light bulb moment of, wow, well, why don't we use that for testing? We'll make sure that the water is, essentially purified before we shoot it at the surface. Then we shoot it at the surface, and whatever comes back in the water, we test that. That's effectively what they're doing with M-Vac. Another cool technology that I hope we see get more use, and maybe we'll wind up here on Case Cracked again. I want to give a very big thank you to Rita Maria Wanninger for a PayPal donation. If you'd like to support the channel, you can visit www.lordenarts.com. While you're there, also be sure to check out the new Case Cracked merchandise that we've put together. We've got the new logo on a shirt, and I also made a design where you get the Case Cracked logo on the front of your shirt, and it has a little brain scratch logo on the back, kind of close up to your neck. We've got all kinds of other merch there too, so please be sure to check that out. Take care, everyone. Hope you're staying safe and staying healthy. I'll see you here on Wednesday with a new missing persons case on Searchlight right here on the Lorden Arts channel.